Hello friends. Did you know that nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy the content, I'd truly appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. It helps a lot. Also, don't forget to leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Your interaction not only supports the channel's growth, but also helps these stories reach more people. Thank you all for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. My name is Cole Hendricks, and I've been working crab boats in the Bering Sea for 17 years. I've seen men go overboard. I've seen boats go down. I've watched frostbite turn fingers black in less than an hour. I've lived through storms that made grown men weep and pray to gods they'd forgotten about. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened during the October run of 2019. We were 3 days out from Dutch Harbor on the FV Northern Gale, a 120-foot crabber that had seen better decades. Captain Raymond Marsh was at the helm, a 62-year-old veteran who'd been fishing these waters since before I was born. The crew was small that season, just 5 of us total, and we were chasing king crab in the waters northeast of St. Paul Island. The weather forecast had been calling for rough seas, but nothing we hadn't handled before. Wind at 30 knots, swells running 12 to 15 feet. Standard October conditions in the Bering. The storm hit us harder than predicted. By midnight on our 4th night out, we were taking waves over the bow that made the whole boat shudder like a living thing trying to shake itself apart. I was in the wheelhouse with Raymond, watching the radar screen and monitoring the VHF while he fought the wheel. The sea was black beyond the windows. Just solid darkness pressing against the glass except when lightning would crack the sky open for a split second and you'd see the mountains of water surrounding us. That's when the ping appeared on the radar. A single, solid contact about 8 miles northeast of our position. Raymond saw it too. We both stared at that green dot on the screen, and something about it felt wrong immediately. The contact wasn't moving. In seas like that, nothing stays still. Everything out here is in constant motion, rising and falling with the swells, getting pushed by wind and current. But this contact just sat there, steady as a rock, in the exact same spot. "You seeing this?" Raymond asked, though he knew I was. His voice had an edge to it I'd rarely heard. The man had spent 40 years on these waters and didn't spook easily. "Check the AIS. See if they're broadcasting." I pulled up the automatic identification system on the secondary screen. Nothing. No vessel name, no call sign, no transponder data at all. Just that solid radar return sitting there in the darkness. Raymond grabbed the VHF mic and hailed on channel 16. "Unidentified vessel at position 57.3 north, 170.1 west. This is the fishing vessel Northern Gale. Do you copy?" Static. Just the hiss and crackle of the storm. He tried again. Same result. We both knew that even if a boat's radio was down, even if they'd lost all power, a vessel that size would still show up on AIS if they had any electronics running at all. Modern boats are required to broadcast. This contact wasn't broadcasting anything except that radar return. Could be a false echo, I suggested, though I didn't believe it. Atmospheric conditions, maybe interference from the storm. Raymond shook his head slowly, never taking his eyes off that green dot. In 38 years, I've never seen a false return hold that steady in conditions like this. That's a solid contact, Cole. That's something real out there. He reached for the logbook and flipped back through the pages, running his finger down entries from years past. I saw him stop on a page from October 2014, 5 years earlier. His face went pale under the red glow of the instrument lights. "What is it?" I asked. Raymond tapped the page. "The Arctic Promise. Went down in a storm not far from here. October 17th, 2014. All 7 crew lost. They found debris 2 weeks later, but never found the boat itself. I looked at the coordinates he'd written in the log that night. The last known position reported by the Arctic Promise before they went silent. Then I looked at the radar contact on our screen. The positions were within half a mile of each other. Close enough that with 5 years of current and drift, they could easily be the exact same spot. The wheelhouse suddenly felt colder than it had any right to be, even with the heater running full blast. "That doesn't mean anything," I said, but my voice sounded hollow. "Coincidence, these waters are full of wrecks. That could be any debris, any old hull on the bottom." "At the surface?" Raymond asked quietly. "That ping is showing surface contact, Cole, not bottom. Whatever that is, it's floating right on top." We stared at that screen for another 10 minutes, neither of us speaking. The storm raged around us, waves crashing against the hull, but inside the wheelhouse there was just the sound of our breathing and the soft beep of the radar sweep going around and around, painting that same solid contact in the same impossible position every time it passed. Then the VHF crackled. Not words, not exactly, just a sound, rhythmic and repeating. 3 short bursts, 3 long, 3 short. Even through the heavy static, the pattern was unmistakable, SOS, the international distress signal. But underneath it, barely audible, there was something else. Numbers, maybe, or coordinates. A voice so distorted and broken by interference that it could have been human, or it could have been something else entirely. Just random noise that our pattern-seeking brains were trying to force into meaning. Raymond grabbed the mic. "Station calling with distress traffic, this is Northern Gale. What is your position and nature of emergency?" The response was the same pattern, the same broken sequence of sounds that might have been a voice and might have been nothing at all. 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. Then that garbled undertone that could have been 570, 700, or could have been the wind screaming through twisted metal somewhere out in the dark. "We should go check it out," I heard myself say, though every instinct I had was screaming not to. Raymond looked at me for a long moment, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Fear, yes, but something else too. The weight of responsibility. If there was even a chance someone was alive out there, we had a duty to investigate. That's the law of the sea. That's the code that keeps any of us alive out here. He turned the wheel, bringing the Northern Gale around to a new heading. The boat rolled hard as we took the waves on our beam, and I had to grab the console to keep from being thrown across the wheelhouse. "Get Anders up here," Raymond said. "I want another set of eyes on this." I called down to the crew quarters and woke Anders Larson, our engineer. He came up the ladder still pulling on his survival suit, salt and pepper hair sticking up in every direction. When we showed him the radar contact and played back the VHF recording I'd had the sense to capture, his expression went carefully neutral. That's how you know something's really wrong out here. When a man who's seen everything stops reacting, you know you're dealing with something that doesn't fit into normal categories. "How long's it been sitting there?" Anders asked. 23 minutes, Raymond said. "Haven't seen it move once." Anders studied the screen, then looked out into the darkness beyond the wheelhouse windows. "And you're sure it's not just the storm playing tricks? Precipitation can give false returns." "Not like this," Raymond said. "Not this steady." We continued toward the contact, fighting through seas that seemed determined to push us anywhere except where we wanted to go. The radar showed our distance closing slowly, 8 miles. 7, 6.5. The contact never moved, never wavered, just sat there waiting for us. At 5 miles out, something changed. The VHF burst to life again, that same SOS pattern, But this time it was louder, clearer, and this time I could make out actual words underneath the static. Arctic promise, taking water, pumps failing. Then that voice, desperate and terrified, giving coordinates that matched exactly where that radar contact was sitting. The transmission ended with a sound that might have been breaking glass or might have been something else. Then silence. Anders and I looked at each other. "That boat went down 5 years ago," I said quietly. "Everyone knows that. There were memorial services, the families." I stopped because Raymond was staring at the radar screen with an expression I'd never seen on his face before. Pure, undiluted dread. "It's moving," he whispered. And he was right. The contact that had been motionless for the past half hour was now closing the distance between us. Not drifting with current or wind, but moving deliberately, on a course that would intercept ours in less than 10 minutes if we both maintained our current speeds and headings. "That's not possible," Anders said, but his voice shook. "No boat moves like that in these seas. Nothing moves like that." The contact was accelerating now, covering distance faster than any vessel should be able to in these conditions. 4 miles, 3.5, 3. We could have turned and run, could have pushed the northern gale to maximum speed and tried to outrun whatever was out there. But we didn't. We just stood in the wheelhouse and watched that contact close the distance, all of us frozen by something that went deeper than fear. Something primal that recognized we were in the presence of something that broke the rules we'd built our lives around. At 2 miles, the contact stopped again. Just stopped dead, as suddenly as it had started moving. The VHF went silent. The storm continued to rage, but inside the wheelhouse we could hear our own heartbeats, could hear the blood rushing in our ears. "Raymond," Anders said carefully, "I think we should consider—" He never finished the sentence because that's when we saw the lights. Not running lights. Not the normal red and green and white that vessels are required to display. These were different. Pale, blue-white lights that seemed to float in the darkness between the waves, appearing and disappearing as the swells rose and fell. There were dozens of them, maybe hundreds, spread across an area that had to be at least 100 yards wide. "What the hell is that?" I heard myself ask. Nobody answered because nobody had an answer. The lights weren't behaving like anything natural. They weren't moving with the waves or being pushed by the wind. They were holding position, all of them together, like they were attached to something massive just beneath the surface. Raymond reached for the searchlight controls and hit the switch. The beam lanced out into the darkness, cutting through rain and spray. For just a moment, maybe 3 or 4 seconds, the light caught something. A shape, huge and dark and wrong. Not a hull, not a ship, not anything I could identify. Just this massive, dark shape that the light seemed to slide off of, like it was absorbing the beam instead of reflecting it. Then it was gone. The lights blinked out simultaneously, all of them at once. The radar contact disappeared. The VHF went dead quiet. We were alone again in the storm, just our boat and the wind and the waves, like nothing had ever been there at all. "Tell me you saw that," I said. "Tell me we all saw that." Anders nodded slowly. Raymond didn't respond. He just stared out into the darkness where those lights had been, his hands gripping the wheel so tight his knuckles had gone white. We stayed on station for another hour, searching the area. The radar showed nothing. The VHF stayed silent. Whatever had been out there was gone, or had chosen to stop revealing itself. Finally, Raymond made the call to break off and return to our original heading. We had pots to haul and a schedule to keep, and standing in the middle of the Bering Sea staring at empty water wasn't going to pay anyone's bills. But something had changed. We all felt it. The ocean felt different now, heavier somehow, like we'd crossed some invisible line and couldn't find our way back. We didn't talk about what we'd seen, not that night, not the next day. We just went about our work, hauling pots and sorting crab and trying to pretend everything was normal. It was 3 days later, when we were getting ready to head back to Dutch Harbor, that Raymond called me up to the wheelhouse. He had the logbook open to the page where he'd written about the Arctic Promise, and next to it was a printout from the VHF recorder. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the audio waveform pattern. "This is the transmission we got that night, the one with the coordinates." I looked at the pattern, not sure what I was supposed to be seeing. "Okay," I said. "And?" Raymond pulled out another printout, this one yellowed and creased like it had been folded and unfolded many times. "This is from the Coast Guard investigation into the Arctic Promise. It's the last transmission they received before the boat went down." He laid the two printouts side by side. They were identical. The waveform patterns matched perfectly, peak for peak, trough for trough. Not similar, not close, exactly the same. "That's impossible," I said. "Audio doesn't work like that. Every transmission is unique, even if it's the same person saying the same words." "I know," Raymond said quietly. "I sent both files to a guy I know who does forensic audio analysis. He called me this morning, said there's no way these should match, said the only explanation would be if we'd somehow recorded the original transmission and played it back. But we didn't do that, Cole. We were 8 miles away when we picked that signal up, in the middle of a storm, 5 years after the Arctic Promise went down." I didn't know what to say to that. Still don't. We made it back to Dutch Harbor without incident, offloaded our catch and went our separate ways like we always did. I haven't worked with Raymond since that trip. Last I heard, he'd sold the Northern Gale and retired to Anchorage. Anders moved to a different boat, something that works the grounds further south, away from where the Arctic Promise went down. I'm still out here, though, still working these waters, and sometimes, on dark nights when the weather's bad and I'm alone in the wheelhouse, I'll see a radar contact that doesn't move like it should. I'll hear static on the VHF that sounds almost like words, almost like someone trying to call for help. And I'll remember those pale lights in the darkness, that massive shape that my mind still can't fully process. The thing is, I've started keeping my own log now. Private, not the official one. And I've been tracking something that bothers me more than anything else about that night. I've been tracking the anniversary of when the Arctic Promise went down. October 17th. Because I've been hearing stories from other fishermen, guys who work these same waters. Stories about radar contacts that appear and disappear. About distress calls on Channel 16 that nobody can source. About lights in the water that don't behave like anything natural. And every single one of those stories happens within a week of October 17th. Every single year. Like whatever happened to the Arctic Promise, whatever took that boat and its crew, comes back to the same spot on the same date. Comes back and waits. Comes back and calls out on the radio in voices that have been silent for years. Comes back looking for something. Or maybe looking for someone. I've got a trip scheduled for October 15th this year. We'll be working grounds right near where the Northern Gale picked up that contact. My captain asked me if I wanted to go, said he'd understand if I wanted to sit this one out. I told him I'd be there, told him I'd work the trip. Because here's the thing about the Bering Sea. It's not about whether you're scared. You're always scared out here. It's about whether you're scared enough to quit. And I'm not. Not yet, but I'm bringing extra batteries for my flashlight, and I'm making sure my survival suit is in good repair, and I'm going to be watching that radar screen every minute we're out there. Because I know now that there are things in these waters that don't show up in any manual or safety video. Things that don't follow the rules we think govern how the world works. And maybe, just maybe, I'll see those lights again. That radar contact that doesn't move right. That shape in the darkness that shouldn't exist. And if I do, I'm going to do what Raymond did. I'm going to document it. I'm going to make sure there's a record, because if it happened to us, it's happened to others, and it's going to happen again. The Bering Sea keeps its secrets. But sometimes, on certain nights, in certain conditions, those secrets rise to the surface. They broadcast on Channel 16. They light up the darkness with pale blue-white lights. They appear on radar screens as contacts that shouldn't be there. And they remind us that for all our technology, for all our experience, we're still just small things in a very big ocean. An ocean that was here long before we were, and will be here long after we're gone. And sometimes, just sometimes, it sends back the things it's taken. Not to return them, not to release them, but to remind us that the sea never really lets anything go. The wind had been blowing steady out of the northwest for 3 days straight when we finally got clearance to head back out. I'm Gunnar Thorne, been pulling crab in the Bering for 22 years, and I've learned that sometimes the waiting is harder than the work itself. We'd been stuck in Dutch Harbor watching the weather reports, watching our money drain away in dock fees and bar tabs while the crab were out there waiting to be caught. When the forecast finally showed a window, even a narrow one, we took it. The FV Sovereign was a good boat, solid and reliable in ways that mattered more than comfort. Captain Ellis Carr had been running her for 6 years, and he knew these waters like some men know their own living rooms. We had a full crew, 7 of us including Ellis, and we were heading to a spot about 40 miles north of St. Paul Island that had been good to us the previous season. The plan was simple. Set 200 pots across 3 strings, let them soak for 48 hours, then start hauling, standard operation. The temperature was dropping fast as we cleared the harbor. I could see ice starting to form on the railings, that thin crust that builds up when seawater spray freezes on contact with metal. It wasn't dangerous yet, not the kind of ice buildup that could capsize a boat, but it was a reminder that we were working in conditions that could turn deadly if you weren't paying attention. I made sure the deck crew knew to keep chipping ice between sets, keep the weight down, keep the boat balanced. We set the first string of pots just after dawn, working in that gray pre-light that makes everything look flat and distant. The deck was slippery with ice and seawater, and the crane groaned every time we swung a pot overboard. Each pot weighed about 700 pounds empty, and we baited them with chopped herring and cod before sending them down. The water here was about 400 feet deep, cold enough and dark enough that you could drop something over the side and imagine it falling forever before it hit bottom. By mid-morning, we had all 200 pots in the water, marked with buoys that bobbed in the gray chop like the heads of swimmers. We had 48 hours to kill before we could start hauling, so Ellis pointed us toward a sheltered spot near St. Paul where we could get some rest and do some maintenance. The wind was picking up again, not dangerous but uncomfortable, and everyone was ready for a hot meal and a few hours of sleep. The 48 hours passed slowly. We played cards, we slept, we made what repairs we could to gear that always needed fixing. Ellis checked the weather constantly, making sure our window wasn't closing earlier than predicted. The forecast held steady. When it was time to head back out to our strings, we were ready. Tired of waiting, ready to work. The first string of pots came up normal. Heavy with crab, the way they should be. We worked through the line methodically, hauling each pot, emptying it, sorting the crab, rebaiting and dropping it again. The work was hard and wet and cold, but it was good. The catch was solid. We were going to make money on this trip. It was the second string where things started to go wrong. The first 6 pots came up fine, good catch, no problems. But pot number 7 felt different the moment the crane started lifting it. The winch strained harder than it should have, the hydraulics whining with effort. "Heavy one," I called out to Ellis, who was watching from the wheelhouse. "Might be snagged on something." But it wasn't snagged. The pot broke the surface clean, no kelp or debris tangled in the lines. It was just heavy, way heavier than it should have been. The weight indicator on the crane showed almost 1,200 pounds, nearly double what a full pot normally weighed. "Check the scale," Ellis called down. "Something's off with the reading." I checked it. The scale was working fine, calibrated properly. That pot really was 1,200 pounds. We swung it over the deck and dropped it with a crash that made the whole boat shudder. Through the wire mesh, I could see inside. The pot was nearly empty. Maybe 6 or 7 crab, nowhere near enough to account for that weight. "That doesn't make sense," said Tommy Revere, one of our deckhands. He was 24, still new enough to the work that things could surprise him. "Where's the weight coming from?" I didn't have an answer. We opened the pot and emptied it, and those 6 or 7 crab weighed what they should have weighed. Maybe 15, 20 pounds total. We checked the pot itself, looking for anything that might explain the extra weight. Nothing. It was just a standard pot, 700 pounds of steel and netting, same as all the others. We rebaited it and dropped it again, all of us feeling uneasy in a way we couldn't quite name. The next pot came up the same way. 1,200 pounds on the scale, nearly empty inside. Same with the pot after that. 4 pots in a row, all impossibly heavy, all with hardly any crab. Ellis came out of the wheelhouse and looked at the pots himself, running his hands along the wire mesh like he could feel an explanation if he just touched it the right way. "We're bringing up one more," he said. "If it's the same, we're cutting this string and moving on." The 5th pot was different. Not heavy at all. In fact, it came up too light, barely 600 pounds when it should have been closer to 1,000 with the crab that should have been inside. When we got it on deck and opened it, we found out why. The pot was completely empty. Not a single crab, not a single piece of bait. Like it had been cleaned out by something that took the time to remove everything, leaving just the bare metal frame. That's when Tommy noticed the marks on the lines. Deep scores in the nylon rope, running vertically from the pot upward for about 6 feet. The scores were evenly spaced, like something with multiple points or teeth had gripped the line and pulled, or climbed. The marks were too regular to be from rubbing against rocks or debris. They looked deliberate. They looked like something had held onto that line while the pot was on the bottom. "Get the camera," Ellis said quietly. We kept a waterproof camera for documenting any unusual catches or damage to gear. Tommy brought it up and started taking pictures of the scored lines, of the empty pots, of everything that didn't make sense about what we were seeing. Ellis called down to our engineer, Marcus Venn, to come up and look at the weight readings, make sure there wasn't some electrical problem causing false readings on the scale. Marcus spent 20 minutes checking the system and concluded it was working perfectly. If the scale said 1,200 pounds, then we were lifting 1,200 pounds. We decided to continue the string, but carefully, documenting everything. The next 8 pots came up normal. Good weight, good catch, no problems. Then we hit another cluster of the heavy empty pots. 3 in a row, all showing weights that didn't match what was inside them. And all 3 had those scored marks on the lines, running up from the pot toward the surface. "Something's down there," Tommy said. And nobody argued with him because we were all thinking the same thing. Something was interfering with our pots. Something big enough and strong enough to add weight or remove it. Something with grip strong enough to score nylon rope. "We should pull the whole string," Marcus said. "Cut our losses and get out of here." Ellis shook his head. "We've got 130 pots left to haul. That's money sitting down there. I'm not leaving it unless I have a good reason." He looked at each of us. "We keep working." but we stay sharp. Anything else unusual, we talk about it. And if things get worse, we'll reassess. Things got worse. By the time we were halfway through the second string, we'd hauled 15 pots that came up either too heavy or too light, none of them with the catch they should have had. The scored marks on the lines were consistent, always the same pattern, always running upward from the pot. And then we started finding the bait bags. They were still inside the pots, but they'd been torn open. Not by crab. Crab eat through mesh slowly, picking at it until they get to the herring inside. These bags had been ripped open, the mesh torn in long straight lines like something had slashed through with blades. The bait was gone, completely gone, leaving just the shredded bags swinging in the empty pots. "This is starting to feel wrong," Tommy said, and I could hear the fear in his voice. He was young enough to still admit when he was scared, hadn't learned yet to hide it behind experience and bravado. Like we're fishing in something's territory and it's telling us to leave. Ellis didn't respond to that. He just kept the boat moving, kept us hauling pots, kept us working. But I saw the way he was watching the water, the way he kept glancing at the depth sounder like he was expecting to see something that wasn't there. The third string was worse. Almost half the pots came up wrong. Empty or too heavy or with the line scored. We started finding other things too. Dents in the pots themselves. Deep dents like something had squeezed them. Metal twisted in ways that shouldn't have been possible from water pressure alone. One pot came up with the door bent outward. The hinges snapped, like something had forced its way out from the inside. "We need to stop," Marcus said. He was older than the rest of us, 56, with enough experience to know when a situation was turning bad. "This isn't natural. I don't know what's doing this, but I know we shouldn't be here." Ellis looked at the GPS, checking our position. "We've got 52 pots left on this string, then we're done. We haul those and we head in, sell what we've got, and decide if we want to come back." He looked at Marcus. 52 pots. We can do that in 4 hours. 4 hours, and we're finished with this spot. Those 4 hours felt like 40. Every pot that came up was a gamble. Would it be normal? Would it be empty? Would it have those scored lines, those dents, that sense of being touched by something we couldn't see? We worked in silence mostly, just the sound of the crane and the wind and the water. Nobody wanted to talk about what we were thinking. Nobody wanted to give voice to the fear that was building in all of us. The last pot of the string came up heavier than anything we'd hauled all day. The crane struggled with it, the hydraulics screaming. The weight indicator climbed past 1,200 pounds, past 1,300, settling at 1,420. Through the mesh, I could see that the pot was completely empty. Not a single crab, not a piece of bait, just empty metal that somehow weighed more than twice what it should have. We got it on deck and I opened the door to look inside. That's when I felt it. Cold. Not the normal cold of the bearing, but something different. Something that seemed to radiate from inside the pot itself. A cold that made my hands ache even through my work gloves. I pulled back and looked at Ellis. "There's something wrong with this one. It's too cold." Ellis came over and reached into the pot, then pulled his hand back fast. "Jesus," he said quietly. "That's not right. That's not right at all." We got a thermometer and took a reading inside the pot. Negative 40 degrees. The air inside that pot was negative 40 degrees, even though the surrounding air was only in the teens. It was like the pot had been sitting in a freezer, like it had been somewhere else before we brought it up. "Cut it loose," Marcus said. "Cut the line and drop it back over." "I don't care what it costs, we're not keeping that thing on this boat." Ellis nodded. We used bolt cutters to sever the line and shoved the pot back over the rail. It hit the water and sank fast, too fast for something that should float briefly before going down. It just dropped, like it was being pulled. We finished securing the deck and Ellis pointed us toward Dutch Harbor. Nobody talked much during the 18-hour run back. We were all thinking about those pots, about the weight that didn't make sense, about the cold that shouldn't have been there, about the marks on the lines that looked like something had climbed them from the depths. We offloaded what catch we had and made less money than we'd hoped. The damaged pots had to be scrapped or repaired, which ate into our profit. Ellis filed a report with the harbor master, documenting the unusual conditions we'd encountered, but he kept it vague. He didn't mention the impossible weights or the temperature readings or the feeling that something had been watching us from below. He just noted equipment anomalies and moved on. I talked to other crews over the next few weeks, asking casually if anyone had worked those waters recently, if anyone had noticed anything unusual. Most said no, but a very few, would get quiet and look away and say something like, "That's not a good spot," or, "We don't fish there anymore." One old captain, a man named Sorensen, who'd been working the Bering since the 1970s, pulled me aside in a bar and asked me directly what we'd found. I told him. All of it. The weights, the empty pots, the scored lines, the cold. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "That spot used to be good fishing, real good. Back in the 80s, boats would fight over who got to set their gear there. Then, in 1989, a boat called the Deep Fortune was working that area and they lost a man overboard, fell during a haul, went into the water in full gear. They searched for 2 days but never found him. After that, boats started having trouble there, gear coming up damaged, catch being wrong. And sometimes, when they hauled, they'd get pots that weighed more than they should, like you said." "What do you think it is?" I asked. Sorensen finished his beer and stood up. "I think the Bering doesn't give back what it takes. I think sometimes a man goes down there and something changes. The water remembers. And maybe that man, or what he became, remembers too. Remembers what it's like to have something just out of reach. Remembers pulling on lines, trying to climb back up. And maybe, just maybe, he's still down there, still pulling, still trying to get back to the surface." I haven't been back to that spot. Ellis sold the Sovereign the following year and moved to Seattle. Marcus retired. Tommy switched to working oil rigs, said he was done with fishing. The rest of the crew scattered, found other boats, other captains. We never talked about what happened, but sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that last pot, the one that was so cold, the one that weighed so much despite being completely empty. And I wonder what would have happened if we'd kept it on deck instead of cutting it loose. I wonder what we might have found if we'd looked closer, looked longer. And then, I'm glad we didn't. Because some questions aren't meant to be answered. Some weights are meant to stay in the deep, pulling on lines that no one should ever haul up. The thing about night watch is that it gives you too much time to think. I'm Jack Morrison, and I've been running crab boats out of Dutch Harbor for 19 years. I've done hundreds of night watches, maybe thousands, standing in a darkened wheelhouse while the rest of the crew sleeps below, watching screens and gauges and the black water beyond the windows. Usually, it's peaceful, meditative almost, but that November night in 2017, peace was the last thing I felt. We were working a spot about 70 miles west of St. Matthew Island on the FV Persistence, chasing blue king crab in some of the loneliest water in the Bering Sea. Captain Niels Brennan was asleep in his quarters, along with our 4 deckhands. I had the midnight to 4 a.m. watch, which meant 4 hours alone with my thoughts and the soft electronic sounds of the instruments. The sea was relatively calm for once, just a long swell rolling in from the southwest, and visibility was good, clear sky, half moon, enough light to see maybe a mile in every direction. I saw the first flare at 1:47 a.m. I know the exact time because I checked the clock immediately, knowing I'd need to report it accurately. The flare went up from a point maybe 3 miles off our port bow, a brilliant red star shell that climbed high into the sky before bursting and beginning its slow descent. Even at that distance, it lit up the water below it with that distinctive crimson glow. I grabbed the binoculars and trained them on the spot where the flare had originated, looking for the vessel that must have fired it. There was nothing, just empty ocean, the swells rolling past in that regular rhythm that meant deep water and no obstructions. No running lights, no silhouette of a hull, no sign of any vessel at all. I checked the radar. The screen showed clear water in that direction. No contacts within 10 miles of our position. I switched to the AIS display, thinking maybe a boat was out there with a malfunctioning radar reflector. Nothing. No transponder signals, no identification data. I grabbed the VHF mic and called on channel 16. Vessel firing red flares at position 60.2 north, 172.4 west. This is the fishing vessel Persistence. What is the nature of your emergency? I waited, listening to the static. No response. I called again, same result. The regulations are clear. You see a distress flare, you respond. It doesn't matter if you're tired, doesn't matter if you're in the middle of hauling gear, doesn't matter if it's inconvenient. Someone fires a flare, they're in trouble, and you help. That's how it works out here. That's what keeps any of us alive. I woke Niels and explained the situation. He was in the wheelhouse in less than 2 minutes, fully dressed, wide awake in that way experienced captains can manage even after being pulled from deep sleep. He checked the radar and the AIS himself, confirming what I'd seen. Nothing out there. No contacts. But we both knew what a red flare meant. Distress, immediate danger. We had to investigate. Niels changed course, bringing the Persistence around toward the position where I'd seen the flare. He got on the VHF and broadcast our intentions, reporting the sighting to the Coast Guard station at St. Paul Island and requesting any information about vessels that might be in the area. The Coast Guard acknowledged and reported that they had no vessels registered in that quadrant. No float plans filed for that location. They would dispatch a helicopter at first light if we found anything that required assistance. We were about 2 miles from the flare position when I saw the second one. Same location, same red star shell climbing into the sky. This time I kept the binoculars trained on the spot as the flare burst, and I watched the burning remnant fall towards the water. The flare illuminated the ocean surface for maybe 30 seconds as it descended, and in that red light I could see waves and nothing else. No boat, no debris, nothing that would explain where those flares were coming from. "This doesn't make sense," Niels said quietly. He was checking our depth sounder, which showed 460 feet of water beneath us. Deep enough that no structure from the bottom should be reaching the surface. No rocks, no shallows, nothing that a boat could be grounded on. "Cole, get the crew up. Full safety gear. If there are people in the water, we need to be ready." I called down to the crew quarters, and within 5 minutes we had everyone on deck in survival suits, searchlights ready, grappling hooks standing by. The Persistence crept toward the flare position at slow speed, all of us scanning the water for any sign of survivors or wreckage. The moon was bright enough that we should have been able to see anything floating, should have been able to spot an overturned hull or a life raft or debris field. We saw nothing. At 2:19 a.m., we reached the exact coordinates where the flares had originated. Niels brought the boat to a stop, and we drifted. Searchlights playing across the water in all directions. The ocean was empty. Just waves and darkness beyond the reach of our lights. No oil slick that would indicate a recent sinking. No smell of diesel or smoke. Nothing. Then the third flare went up, maybe 200 yards directly ahead of us. We all saw it clearly, watched it rise and burst and fall, and we all saw that it came from empty water. There was no boat there. No one in the water holding a flare gun. The flare just appeared from the surface, like it had been fired from beneath the waves themselves. "That's impossible," said Eric Kane, our engineer. He was standing next to me on deck, staring at the spot where the flare had originated. Flares don't work underwater. The propellant needs oxygen. You can't fire a flare from beneath the surface. But we'd all seen it. The flare had come from the water, not from a boat or a person floating on top of it. From the water itself. Niels got back on the radio and reported what we were seeing to the Coast Guard. I could hear the skepticism in the operator's voice as he acknowledged, could imagine him making notes about a fishing crew that was probably overtired and seeing things. But to his credit, the operator took the report seriously and said they would have a helicopter in the area by dawn to conduct a thorough search. We stayed on station, slowly circling the area, searchlights cutting through the darkness. At 2:43 a.m., another flare. At 3:07, another. Each one coming from empty water, each one burning its brief red path through the sky before falling into the ocean. We tried approaching the exact spots where the flares originated, but there was never anything there when we arrived. Just water. As dawn started to break around 4:30 a.m., the flares stopped. We'd seen 7 in total, all from roughly the same location, all from places where our instruments said nothing existed. The Coast Guard helicopter arrived just after 7 o'clock a.m. and conducted a grid search of the area for 3 hours. They found nothing. No vessel, no debris, no survivors. The pilot radioed us before departing and said that unless we wanted them to continue searching, they would return to base. Their sensors had picked up nothing unusual in the area. No heat signatures, no radar contacts, no emergency beacons. We should have left then. Should have marked the position and moved on, continued with our fishing operation. But Niels made a decision that I think he regretted later. He decided we would set some pots in that area, see if anything unusual turned up when we hauled them. Maybe there was a wreck down there, something on the bottom that might explain the flares. Maybe there was debris or evidence that would make sense of what we'd seen. We set 40 pots in a grid pattern around the coordinates where the flares had appeared, using extra line to reach the 460-foot bottom. We let them soak for 36 hours, then came back to haul. I was hoping the pots would come up empty, that we'd find nothing and could write off the whole incident as some weird atmospheric phenomenon or mass hallucination brought on by fatigue. But that's not what happened. The first pot came up normal. Good catch. Maybe 30 pounds of king crab. Same with the second and third. But the fourth pot, the one we'd set almost exactly where the flares had originated, came up with something else inside. Tangled in the mesh was a flare gun. An old model, the kind that hadn't been manufactured in probably 20 years. The gun was corroded and covered in marine growth, like it had been underwater for a very long time. But when we opened the pot and pulled it out, we found that the chamber still had a flare loaded in it. An unexpended red star shell, still viable, still ready to fire. "Don't touch that trigger," Niels said immediately. "Eric, get something to secure that flare. We're not firing it accidentally." Eric found some tape and carefully secured the trigger mechanism so it couldn't discharge. We bagged the gun as evidence and continued hauling. 2 more pots came up with similar finds. One had what looked like a life jacket, the old cork-filled type that nobody uses anymore. The other had a piece of nylon rope with a brass clip attached, the kind used for tying off to deck cleats. All of the items were old, heavily corroded, covered in the kind of marine growth that indicated years underwater. Niels photographed everything and recorded the exact position where each item had been recovered. When we finished hauling, he radioed the Coast Guard again and reported what we'd found. They asked us to bring the items in when we returned to port so they could be examined. The operator mentioned that they would check their records for any vessels reported missing in that area, any incidents that might explain the debris. We were securing the last of the pots when I noticed something on our sonar. The fish finder we used to locate crab concentrations was showing something odd. A shadow on the bottom, in about the same location where we'd set that grid of pots. The shadow was big, maybe 80 feet long, roughly boat-shaped. I called Niels over and showed him the display. Could be a wreck, I said. Would explain the debris. Niels studied the sonar reading. Depth there is 460. That's deep for a wreck that would still be readable on sonar. Most wrecks that old would be buried or broken up. He adjusted the sonar settings, trying to get a clearer image. But yeah, that definitely looks like something on the bottom, something big. We made several passes over the area, mapping the shadow from different angles. The more we looked, the more it looked like a vessel. The right size and shape, positioned on the bottom like it had settled there after sinking. Niels marked the position in our GPS and made detailed notes in the logbook. We'll report this when we get in, he said. Let the authorities decide if they want to send a dive team down. The trip back to Dutch Harbor was quiet. We were all thinking about those flares, about the debris we'd hauled up, about the shadow on the bottom that looked like a sunken boat. Niels spent hours going through Coast Guard records online, looking for any vessels reported missing in that area. He found one that matched. A crab boat called the Northern Aurora had disappeared in that exact location in March 1992, almost 26 years earlier. The boat had been working the Blue King grounds when it radioed that they were experiencing engine trouble. That was the last communication. A search was conducted, but no wreckage was ever found, no debris, no survivors. The Northern Aurora and her crew of 6 simply vanished. Niels printed out everything he could find about the Northern Aurora and brought it to the Coast Guard when we docked. They were interested, but cautious. They explained that sonar shadows could be misleading, that rock formations or dense kelp beds could show up looking like vessels. They would make a note of the position, and if resources allowed, they might send a survey team to investigate. But it wasn't a priority. There were no active missing persons, no immediate safety threat. Just a possible wreck site in very deep water. The flare gun and other items we'd recovered were sent to a lab for analysis. 3 weeks later, we got a report back. The flare gun was manufactured in 1987, consistent with the time period when the Northern Aurora was lost. The life jacket was a model used extensively in the early 1990s. The rope and brass clip matched equipment that would have been standard on fishing vessels from that era. Everything pointed to the debris being from the Northern Aurora. But the report included something else, something that made Niels call me immediately when he read it. The flare that had been loaded in the gun we'd recovered had been manufactured in 2017. Not 92. Not some old stock that had been sitting in the gun for 26 years. The flare was new, made just months before we'd found it. The lab couldn't explain that. They double-checked their findings and confirmed them. The gun was from 1987, but the flare inside it was from 2017. I met Niels at a coffee shop to talk about the report. We sat in a back corner where we wouldn't be overheard, and he showed me the paperwork. How does a gun that's been underwater for 26 years have a brand new flare in it? He asked. That doesn't make sense. Nothing about this makes sense. I didn't have an answer. Still don't. We talked about it for an hour, going over every possible explanation we could think of. Maybe someone had found the gun on the bottom and reloaded it as a joke before throwing it back. Maybe the gun hadn't been underwater for 26 years. Maybe it had been lost recently and the corrosion was from something else. Maybe the lab had mixed up samples and tested the wrong flare. Every explanation felt wrong, felt forced. like we were trying to make reality fit our expectations, instead of accepting what we'd actually seen. "What if the flares we saw weren't being fired from the surface?" I said finally. "What if they were coming from the wreck on the bottom? What if somehow, every few years or every few decades, that boat down there fires off distress flares? Still trying to call for help? Still broadcasting that it's in trouble?" Niels looked at me for a long moment. "That's impossible," he said, but his voice had no conviction in it. Because we both knew that impossible things happened in the Bering. We both knew that the ocean didn't follow rules, didn't care about what was supposed to be possible or not. I haven't been back to that spot. Haven't wanted to see those coordinates on my GPS. Haven't wanted to risk seeing another flare rise from empty water. Niels sold the Persistence the following year and moved to Juneau. Said he was done with crab fishing. The Coast Guard never sent a dive team to investigate the sonar shadow. Budget issues, they said. Other priorities. But sometimes I check the marine radio traffic from that area, listening to see if any other boats report unusual flares or debris. And occasionally, maybe once a year, I'll hear something. A vessel reporting red flares from a position that corresponds to where the Northern Aurora went down. The Coast Guard responds, searches are conducted, nothing is found, and then it's quiet again for another year. I've talked to a few other fishermen who've worked those waters, asked them casually if they've ever seen anything unusual out there. Most say no, but a few, a very few, will get a distant look in their eyes and mention seeing flares in places where no boats were visible. Seeing lights beneath the surface that rose up and burst in the sky. They don't like talking about it, don't want to be known as the guy who tells crazy stories. So they stay quiet, same as me. But I know what I saw. I know those flares were real, know they came from water where nothing floated. And I know that somewhere on the bottom of the Bering Sea, 460 feet down, there's a boat that went down 26 years ago. A boat that maybe doesn't understand it's supposed to be gone. A boat that's still calling for help, still firing flares into the darkness, still hoping that someone will see them and come to the rescue. And the worst part? The part that keeps me awake some nights? Those flares are working. Boats are seeing them. We're responding, we're searching, we're trying to help. But there's nothing we can do. The crew of the Northern Aurora is beyond help, beyond rescue. They're 460 feet down in water so cold and dark that nothing living should be able to survive there. And yet their boat keeps calling, keeps firing flares, keeps bringing vessels like ours to the exact spot where they disappeared. I don't know what that means. Don't know if it's some weird physics phenomenon where pressure or current or chemistry allows old flares to ignite spontaneously. Don't know if it's something else, something that doesn't fit into any category I learned about in navigation school or safety courses. All I know is that every time I see a flare in the distance now, every time that red light climbs into the sky, I wonder if it's real. Wonder if there's actually someone out there who needs help. Or if it's just another ghost signal from a boat that forgot it was supposed to stay silent. The Bering Sea is full of wrecks. Hundreds of boats have gone down over the decades. Thousands of men have been lost. Most of them stay quiet, stay buried in the darkness and the cold. But some of them, a very few, don't stay quiet. They keep transmitting, keep signaling, keep calling out into the darkness hoping someone will answer. And sometimes, on certain nights in certain conditions, their calls reach the surface. They fire their flares and light up the sky and remind us that the ocean never really lets go of what it takes. And we respond. Because that's what we do. That's the code we live by. You see a flare, you help. Even if the help comes too late. Even if the help is impossible. Even if the only thing you accomplish is witnessing that someone, somewhere, is still trying to be saved. February is the worst month to be on the Bering Sea. I'm Anders Colby, been fishing these waters for 26 years, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that nothing good happens in February. The days are short, the weather is vicious, and the ice, God, the ice. It forms on everything. Your railings, your deck, your rigging. It builds up so fast that you're constantly chipping away at it, fighting to keep your boat balanced, fighting to keep from becoming so top-heavy that the next wave rolls you over and you never come back up. But February is also when the opilio crab are running, and opilio means money. So despite knowing better, despite every instinct telling me to stay in port, I found myself on the FV Arctic Ranger in February 2018, heading north into some of the most hostile water on the planet. Captain Simon Holt was running the boat, and he'd assembled a crew of 6, including myself. We were going after snow crab in the waters between St. Matthew and St. Lawrence Island, a stretch of ocean that's productive in winter because most boats are smart enough to stay away. The temperature had dropped to 5 below zero when we left Dutch Harbor, and it only got colder as we pushed north. By the time we reached our fishing grounds, we were looking at -15, with wind chill making it feel closer to -40. The sea was starting to freeze. Not solid, not yet, but you could see ice forming on the surface in the calmer patches between swells. Thin ice, fragile ice, but it was there, and it would get thicker if we stayed out long enough. We set our first string of pots without incident. The work was brutal in that cold, every movement requiring extra effort because we were wearing so many layers, because our hands were numb even inside insulated gloves, because the wind cut through every gap in our clothing and found skin to freeze. But we got the pots in the water, marked them, and moved on to the next string. By the end of the first day, we had 200 pots set across 4 strings, ready to soak. The weather got worse overnight. The temperature dropped another 10 degrees, and the wind picked up to 30 knots. By dawn, the ocean surface was showing serious ice formation. Not the thin patches from the day before, but actual ice, sheets of it covering calm areas, making the water look more like a field of broken glass than liquid. Simon checked the weather forecast and didn't like what he saw. Another cold front moving in, temperatures expected to drop even further. We had maybe 48 hours before conditions would force us to abandon our gear and run for port. We'll haul 1 string today, Simon decided. See what the catch looks like. If it's good, we'll work through the night and get as much up as we can before the weather shuts us down completely. That seemed reasonable. We'd all worked through worse conditions. We could handle 2 days of hard pulling if it meant going home with full holds. The first string was in the northern part of our grid, the closest to St. Lawrence Island. We reached the first marker buoy around 9 o'clock a.m., just as the sun was clearing the horizon and turning the ice-covered ocean into a landscape of white and gray and pale blue. It was beautiful in a deadly sort of way, the kind of beauty that could kill you if you weren't careful. That's when we saw the line. It ran across the ice in front of us, perfectly straight, maybe a quarter-mile long. At first, I thought it was a pressure ridge, the kind that forms when ice sheets collide and buckle upward. But pressure ridges aren't straight. They meander and curve, following the forces that create them. This line was geometric, precise, like someone had taken a ruler and drawn it across the surface of the frozen ocean. "What the hell is that?" asked Marcus Finn, one of our deckhands. He was 28, still young enough to be surprised by things he saw out here. Simon brought the Arctic Ranger closer, slow and careful because running into ice can damage a hull faster than anything except maybe rocks. As we approached, we could see that the line wasn't raised like a pressure ridge. It was more like a cut, a straight channel, maybe 6 inches wide where the ice had been, I don't know, removed? Melted? It looked like something had sliced through the frozen surface in a perfectly straight line. Simon checked our charts. The line ran almost exactly north-south, following what would have been a compass bearing rather than any natural feature. There were no underwater ridges or currents or anything else that would explain why ice would form differently in that specific pattern. "Run alongside it," Simon told our helmsman. "Let's see where it goes." We followed the line north. It continued past the point where we could see it, disappearing into the iced-over water ahead. We followed it for 3 miles before it finally ended, or at least before we lost sight of it in ice that had formed solid enough that the line was no longer visible. The whole way, it maintained that same perfect straightness, never varying by more than a few degrees. "Could be from a boat's wake," Marcus suggested. "Maybe something came through here before the ice formed and the wake pattern froze differently." That was a reasonable theory, except for one problem. The line was too narrow. A boat's wake spreads out, leaves a V pattern. This was just a single straight channel, consistent width the entire length. Like something had dragged a blade through the ice in a single continuous motion. We had pots to haul, so we couldn't spend all day investigating a weird ice formation. Simon took some photographs and marked the position in his GPS, then we moved on to start working our string. The first pot came up normal. Good catch, decent weight. Same with the second and third. But when we reached the fourth pot, the one we'd set almost exactly where that ice line had ended, our depth sounder started acting strange. The bottom depth had been showing consistently around 380 feet. But as we approached the pot's position, the reading started fluctuating. 380, 360, 340, 290. The numbers jumped around with no pattern, like we were crossing over a canyon or ridge. But the charts showed flat bottom in this area, no significant features. Simon checked our position multiple times to make sure we were where we thought we were. We were. The charts were just wrong, or something was happening with our sounder. "Could be a school of fish," I suggested. "Dense enough so a school can give false bottom readings." Simon shook his head. "Not this time of year. Not at this depth. Water's too cold. Everything's too deep." He switched our sounder to a different frequency, thinking maybe we were getting interference. The readings continued to fluctuate wildly. We hooked the pot and started hauling it up. At 200 feet of depth, the winch caught on something. The line went taut, the hydraulics straining like they were pulling against resistance. "Snagged," Marcus called out. "Caught on something." But then the resistance released and the pot came up smoothly. When we got it on deck, we found something strange. The pot itself was fine, no damage. Good catch of crab inside. But the line was covered in scratches. Not frayed or worn, but scratched, like something metallic had gripped it and left marks. The scratches ran in parallel lines, evenly spaced, running the entire length of the line from the pot up to where it met the buoy. 3 distinct lines, maybe a 1/4 inch apart, cut deep enough into the nylon that we could feel them with our fingers. "What could do that?" Marcus asked. "What's down there that would leave marks like that?" Nobody had an answer. We emptied the pot and reset it, all of us quiet and uneasy. The next 3 pots came up normal, no scratches on the lines, no problems with the haul. But the depth sounder continued to give strange readings. The bottom kept jumping between 300 and 400 feet, sometimes showing changes of 100 feet or more in just seconds. It was like we were crossing over terrain that was moving, rising and falling in patterns that made no sense. Around noon, the ice started to close in. The wind had dropped and the surface was freezing fast, sheets of ice forming and linking together into larger and larger areas of solid surface. Simon made the call to finish the string quickly and get moving before we got trapped in ice that could crush a hull if it decided to shift and compress. We worked faster, pulling pots as quick as we could without being careless. The last pot on the string was positioned almost exactly on top of where we'd first seen that strange line in the ice. When we started hauling it, the depth sounder went crazy. The numbers flickered and jumped, showing readings from 200 feet to 600 feet, cycling through impossible changes every few seconds. And the line, when it came up, was different from the others. It was cold, not just cold from being in the water, but cold in a way that didn't make sense. Ice had formed on the line, thick ice, covering it from the pot all the way up to the surface. Ice shouldn't form like that. The water temperature was below freezing, yes, but it takes time for ice to build up on a moving line. This ice looked like it had been there for hours, maybe days, like the line had been sitting still in freezing water instead of being hauled through it. We got the pot on deck and the ice on the line started cracking, falling off in chunks that hit the deck with a sound like breaking glass. Underneath, the nylon showed more of those parallel scratches, but these were deeper. These had cut almost halfway through the line's diameter. A few more hauls and the line would have severed, and we would have lost the pot and everything below it. "We're done here," Simon said. "Pull the marker buoys and let's get moving. I don't like this." We secured the deck quickly, and Simon pointed us toward our second string, further south and hopefully away from whatever was causing the strange readings and the scratched lines. Behind us, the ice was closing over the water we'd just been working, sealing it back up like we'd never been there. The second string was better. Normal depths, normal hauls, no scratches on the lines. We worked through the afternoon and into the evening, pulling pots and resetting them, building up a decent catch. By midnight we'd finished the string and Simon decided we could grab a few hours of sleep before starting on the third string at dawn. The temperature had dropped to -22. The boat was coated in ice an inch thick on every surface. We chipped what we could off the deck and railings before heading below to get warm. I was in my bunk, almost asleep, when I heard the sound. It came from outside, transmitted through the hull. A metallic scraping, like something dragging along the bottom of the boat. Long and slow, lasting maybe 10 seconds before stopping. I lay there listening, wondering if I'd imagined it. Then it came again. That same metallic scrape, running the length of the hull from bow to stern. I got up and went to the wheelhouse. Simon was there, standing watch, staring at the depth sounder. "You hear that?" I asked. He nodded. 3 times now. Something's under us. The depth sounder was showing 360, consistent for the first time since we'd started having problems. But every time that scraping sound came, the reading would jump briefly to 280 before returning to 360, like whatever was making the sound was also blocking our sounder, making it think the bottom was closer than it actually was. "Could be ice," I suggested, though I didn't believe it. Piece of submerged ice bumping against the hull. Simon didn't respond. He just kept watching the sounder, watching for that next jump in the reading. It came 30 seconds later, accompanied by that scraping sound. 360 to 280 and back again. Something large enough to give a solid return on the sounder, something close enough to touch our hull. We stayed in the wheelhouse for an hour, monitoring the sounds and the depth readings. The pattern continued. Every few minutes, that scraping sound and that jump in depth. Always the same magnitude, always the same duration. Like whatever was down there was measuring us, learning the dimensions of our hull. Simon called the crew up and told them what was happening. Everyone stood on deck in the freezing darkness, listening to the scraping sounds, trying to see anything in the black water around us. At 2:30 a.m., the ice around us started to crack. Not breaking from current or wind, but cracking in straight lines. We could see them forming, perfectly straight fractures running through the ice in multiple directions, all converging on our boat. The cracks were forming a pattern, a geometric design that made no sense for natural ice breakup. We watched in silence as the pattern completed itself, leaving us sitting in a circle of clear water surrounded by ice that had fractured into triangular segments, all pointing inward toward the Arctic Ranger. "We need to move," Marcus said, his voice shaking. "We need to move right now." Simon didn't argue. He engaged the engines and we started pushing through the ice, breaking our way out of that circle. The ice resisted, thicker than it should have been, but the Arctic Ranger was built for these conditions and we forced our way through. Once we were clear of the pattern, Simon opened up the throttles and we ran south. We left our remaining strings where they were, abandoned 150 pots that represented thousands of dollars of gear and potential catch. Nobody argued with that decision. We all wanted to be away from that place, away from whatever had been beneath us, away from the ice that cracked in straight lines and the depth sounders that showed impossible readings. We made it back to Dutch Harbor 36 hours later. The harbor was full of boats that had come in early, driven off the grounds by the extreme cold and the ice. We offloaded what catch we had, and Simon filed a report with the harbor master about the gear we'd abandoned. He mentioned equipment malfunctions and dangerous ice conditions, but he didn't mention the straight line in the ice, or the scratched lines or the metallic scraping sounds. He didn't mention the pattern that had formed around our boat, or the depth readings that jumped impossibly. I talked to a marine biologist friend of mine after we got in, described what we'd seen without telling him where it had happened. He listened carefully, and then asked me questions about the ice line, about how straight it had been, about the width and depth. When I finished answering, he was quiet for a long time. Then he told me something that made my skin crawl. "There are things called pressure waves in ice," he said. "When ice forms under certain conditions, pressure can build up beneath it. That pressure sometimes releases in straight lines, creating fractures that can run for miles. But those fractures form downward from the surface. They don't form upward from below." He paused. "What you're describing sounds more like something traveled underneath the ice, creating a heat signature or pressure wave that prevented ice from forming in a straight line. Something moving in a perfectly straight bearing, maintaining a consistent depth. Something large enough to affect ice formation across its entire track." "What kind of something?" I asked. He shook his head. "I don't know. Submarine maybe, but there aren't supposed to be subs operating in those waters. And subs don't move that shallow, wouldn't risk it in ice conditions. So I don't know what it could have been. But whatever made that line was deliberate. It was traveling in a straight line toward a specific destination." I thought about that. Thought about the line ending exactly where we'd had all our problems with the depth sounder. Thought about the scratched lines and the metallic scraping and the pattern that had formed in the ice around our boat. And I realized that the line hadn't been traveling toward a destination. It had been traveling toward our pots, toward the gear we'd set in that specific location. Like it had known we would be there, had come looking for us. The Arctic Ranger went out again 3 weeks later with a different crew. Simon had retired, said he was done with fishing. I heard they went back to pull the gear we'd abandoned, recover those 150 pots. They found most of them, but all of them were damaged. Not weathered or broken by ice, but bent. The frames were twisted out of shape, like something had grabbed each pot and compressed it. The marine growth on the damaged sections was minimal, suggesting the damage had happened recently, not over the weeks the pots had been sitting there. And they found something else. One of the pots had something frozen to it. A piece of metal, maybe 8 inches long, curved and tapered to a point. The metal was dark, almost black, and it was marked with those same parallel lines we'd seen scratched into our pot lines. 3 lines, evenly spaced, running the length of the metal. Like whatever had made the marks had also left behind a piece of itself. That piece of metal is in a lab somewhere now, being analyzed. I've asked a few times what they found, but nobody wants to tell me. The official word is that it's marine debris, possibly from an old wreck. But I've seen the photographs. And that metal doesn't look like anything from a boat. It looks too smooth, too deliberately shaped. It looks manufactured, but not by any process I recognize. I don't fish those waters anymore. Don't go anywhere near the area between St. Matthew and St. Lawrence Island. There are plenty of other grounds in the Bering, plenty of other places to chase crab without going to the place where ice forms in straight lines and depth sounders give impossible readings. Let someone else deal with whatever's under that ice. Let someone else try to explain the scratches and the sounds and the geometric patterns. Because I know what I saw, know what I heard. And I know that sometimes, in the deepest cold of February, something moves beneath the ice of the Bering Sea. Something that travels in perfectly straight lines, something that marks what it touches. Something that doesn't belong to the world we understand. And when it surfaces, when it decides to make its presence known, it does so in ways that follow rules we don't recognize. Geometric rules, mathematical rules, rules that have nothing to do with anything natural or alive. And I know that somewhere up there, right now, that line is still forming, cutting through the ice in its perfect straightness, traveling toward coordinates we might be foolish enough to visit, waiting for the next boat to set pots in its path, waiting to measure another hull, waiting to scratch another set of lines into the nylon rope that connects us to the bottom of the world. Fog in the Bering Sea is different from fog anywhere else. It comes in thick and fast, turning a clear day into absolute zero visibility in minutes. I'm Nolan Chase, and in my 24 years of fishing these waters, I've learned to respect fog maybe more than I respect storms. Storms you can see coming. Storms you can prepare for. Fog just appears, wraps itself around your boat, and suddenly you're blind in water where 100 things can kill you. It was early September 2016 when I saw the boat. We were on the FV Silvertide, working the Red King grounds about 50 miles south of the Pribilof Islands. The weather had been perfect all week. Clear skies, light winds, good visibility. We'd been making excellent time, hauling pots and resetting them, building up a catch that would make this one of the better trips of the season. Captain Lewis Park was in high spirits, talking about getting home early, about making a second trip before the season closed. The fog came in around 11 p.m. on a Tuesday night. I was on watch in the wheelhouse while the rest of the crew slept, and I saw it rolling in on the radar like a solid wall. 1 minute we had clear screens, the next minute we were surrounded by a gray mass that reduced visibility to maybe 30 feet. I slowed the boat immediately and hit the horn, the required signal to alert any other vessels that we were in the area. Lewis came up from his quarters, woken by the course change. He looked at the radar and the view outside and nodded. "Good call. Let's hold position here until this clears. No point navigating blind if we don't have to." We had our anchor light on, our running lights, everything we were required to display. We weren't going anywhere, just sitting and waiting for the fog to burn off or blow away. That's when I saw the lights. Not bright, not the normal running lights you'd expect from a commercial vessel. These were dim, yellowish, like old incandescent bulbs that hadn't been changed in years. They appeared off our starboard side, maybe 200 yards out, moving slowly through the fog. I grabbed the binoculars but couldn't make out any detail. Just those dim lights and a dark shape behind them that might have been a hull. "Someone's moving in this soup," Lewis said. He grabbed the VHF mic. "Vessel at position 57.1 north, 169.8 west. This is the fishing vessel Silvertide. Be advised, we are stationary at this location. Please identify your vessel and intentions." No response. The lights continued moving, tracking a course that would take them past our stern at maybe 150 yards. Lewis tried again on different channels, same result. No response. No acknowledgement. We watched the lights move through the fog, and something about them felt wrong. The speed was off. They were moving too steadily, too smoothly for conditions where you should be barely crawling forward. "Run the spotlight on them," Lewis said. "See if we can get a look." I hit the searchlight and swung it toward the lights. The beam cut through the fog, but couldn't penetrate far enough to illuminate the other vessel. The fog was too thick, the light just reflecting back and creating a glow that made it harder to see rather than easier. But for just a moment, maybe 2 seconds, the fog thinned slightly and I got a glimpse of the boat. It was old. Not old like well-maintained antique, but old like it should have been scrapped decades ago. The hull I could see was dark with rust and what might have been marine growth. The wheelhouse was small, compact, the style from maybe the 1960s or 70s. And the stern, where the vessel name should have been painted, was just smooth, dark hull. No name, no port of call, no registration numbers that I could see. Then the fog closed in again, and the boat was gone, swallowed back into the gray. The lights faded until they weren't visible anymore. Lewis and I looked at each other. "That was weird," I said. "No AIS signature, no radio response, no visible registration. What kind of boat operates like that?" Lewis was checking the radar. "I'm not getting anything. No contact where that boat should be. Nothing." He switched the radar to different ranges, thinking maybe there was some setting wrong. The screen showed clear water in all directions except for some weather returns from the fog itself. Whatever boat we'd just seen, it wasn't showing up on our electronics. "Could be a small boat," I suggested, "under the radar threshold. Maybe a private vessel that isn't required to have AIS. Lewis shook his head. "That boat was big enough to show up. 40 feet at least. Should definitely be on radar at this range." He made a note in the logbook about the sighting, including the time and our position. "Keep watch. If they come back around, let me know immediately." The fog stayed thick for another 3 hours. Around 2:00 a.m. I saw the lights again. Same dim yellow glow, same position relative to our boat, moving in the same direction as before. Like the boat was making a circuit, coming around and passing us again. This time I didn't wait for Lewis. I hit the VHF immediately. "Unidentified vessel showing yellow running lights. This is the fishing vessel Silver Tide. You are required to identify yourself. Please respond on this channel." Nothing, just the hiss of static. The lights moved past us, same steady speed, same smooth track. I ran the searchlight again, and this time I kept it trained on the boat as it passed. The fog was still too thick for good visibility, but I could make out more details. The wheelhouse windows were dark. Not just unlit, but dark in a way that suggested no one was inside. Or maybe the windows were so dirty that no light could penetrate them. The deck was empty, no crew visible, no movement except the forward progress of the vessel itself. As the boat passed our stern, I tried to read the name one more time. There had to be a name. Federal regulations required it. But the stern was just dark hull, rust-stained and weathered, with no indication that a name had ever been painted there. Like the boat had been built without one, or like the name had been removed so thoroughly that no trace remained. Lewis was up again, standing next to me in the wheelhouse. We both watched the lights fade back into the fog. "This doesn't make sense," he said quietly. "Every boat has a name. Every boat that's legally operating has registration numbers. What we're seeing shouldn't exist." I checked our GPS and marked the position where we'd seen the boat both times. The positions were almost identical, just a few yards apart. If the boat was making a circuit, it was following an exact track with precision that would be difficult even with modern navigation equipment. In fog like this, maintaining that kind of accuracy would be nearly impossible. You'd drift with current, get pushed by wind, you wouldn't come back to the exact same position twice. I'm calling the Coast Guard, Lewis decided. This needs to be documented. He got on the radio and reported the sighting to the Coast Guard station at St. Paul Island. The watch officer took the report but didn't sound particularly concerned. Unidentified vessels weren't uncommon. People forgot to turn on their AIS, forgot to respond to hails. It happened. The officer said they'd make note of it and would investigate if any other vessels reported similar sightings. The fog finally started to clear around 5 o'clock a.m. By dawn, visibility had improved to maybe a quarter mile, and we could see the water around us. Empty. No sign of the boat with the yellow lights. We checked our radar carefully, did a full circle sweep. Nothing. We were alone out here, just the silver tide and the rolling gray ocean. We resumed working our pots around 7 o'clock a.m. The day was productive, and we didn't think too much about the boat we'd seen in the fog. Things like that happen out here. You see something strange, you can't explain it, you move on. The ocean is full of mysteries, and most of them aren't worth losing sleep over. But then we saw it again. 3 nights later, another fog bank rolled in after midnight. And at 11:43 p.m., almost exactly the same time as the first sighting, those dim yellow lights appeared. Same position, same track, same smooth, steady speed. This time I was ready. I had the camera out, and I started recording video as the boat passed. The footage isn't great because of the fog, but it shows those lights, shows the dark shape behind them, shows enough detail that you can see I'm not making this up. Lewis tried the radio again. Same result. No response. The boat just moved past us like we weren't there, maintaining its circuit through the fog. "That's the same boat," Lewis said. "I'm sure of it. Same profile, same lights, same everything." He checked the time, and almost exactly 48 hours since the last sighting. We started tracking it. Every time fog rolled in around midnight, the boat would appear. Sometimes we'd see it once, sometimes twice as it completed its circuit. It was never on radar, it never responded to radio hails. It never showed any sign that there was anyone aboard. Just those dim yellow lights and that dark, rust-stained hull moving through the fog at a speed that seemed wrong for the conditions. After the 5th sighting, I started asking other fishermen if they'd seen anything similar. Most looked at me like I was crazy, but a very few, admitted they'd seen boats in the fog that didn't respond to hails, didn't show up on electronics. One captain, an older guy named Thornton, told me he'd seen a boat matching that description back in 2003. Same yellow lights, same dark hull, same absent name on the stern. "It's the Lady Beth," Thornton said. We were sitting in a bar in Dutch Harbor, and he'd had enough drinks that he was willing to talk about things he normally wouldn't mention. Went down in 1978, September storm, about 50 miles south of the Pribilofs. 7 crew lost. They never found the wreck, never found bodies, just debris that washed up weeks later. I asked him how he knew it was the Lady Beth. He pulled out his phone and showed me a photograph, old and faded, that he'd kept saved in his files. It showed a fishing vessel from the 1970s, and even in the poor quality of the image, I could see the similarities. The small wheelhouse, the hull design, the overall profile. "I knew the captain," Thornton said. "Worked with him before he bought the Lady Beth. Good man, good fisherman, not the kind to make mistakes." "What happened to them?" I asked. Thornton shrugged. Storm caught them by surprise. Last radio transmission said they were taking water, trying to make it to shelter. Nothing after that. Coast Guard searched for 3 days, but the weather was too bad. By the time conditions improved enough for an effective search, the boat was long gone. I showed Thornton the video I'd recorded. He watched it 3 times without saying anything. Then he looked at me. "That's her." I'm 90% sure that's the Lady Beth. Same lights, same profile." He paused. "But here's the thing. The Lady Beth had her name on the stern in bright red letters, 3 feet high, visible from a mile away. In your video, there's no name, like it's been removed. Why would someone remove a boat's name?" I asked. Thornton finished his drink. "You don't. You can't. Not completely. Paint wears off, but you can always see where the letters were, shadows in the paint, differences in weathering. But in your video, that stern is clean, like there never was a name painted there." We kept seeing the boat throughout September. The pattern was consistent. Fog, midnight, same position, same track. By the end of the month, we'd documented 12 sightings. Lewis had reported everyone to the Coast Guard, and they'd sent an investigator to talk to us when we came in to offload. The investigator's name was Campbell, and he listened to our account with professional skepticism that was obvious despite his attempts to hide it. "You understand how this sounds," Campbell said after we'd shown him all our evidence. "A ghost ship appearing in the fog, no radar signature, no radio response. You're describing something that doesn't exist." Lewis showed him Thornton's photograph. This boat existed. The Lady Beth was a real vessel with a real crew, and what we're seeing matches its description. Campbell studied the photograph and the video. "The Lady Beth sank 38 years ago. What you're seeing can't be the same vessel." He paused. "However, I'll make note of your reports and pass them along to marine safety. If you see this boat again, try to maintain visual contact and get better documentation." We saw it one more time, on October 3rd. The last night before we headed back to port to offload and resupply. The fog came in heavy around 10 o'clock p.m., and at 11:47 those yellow lights appeared again. But this time, something was different. This time, the boat was closer. Maybe 50 yards off our starboard side instead of the usual 150. Close enough that even in the fog we could see details. The wheelhouse windows weren't just dark, they were empty, not covered or dirty, but absent. Like someone had removed the glass and left just the frames. The deck was cluttered with gear that looked frozen in place, covered in what might have been ice, or might have been something else. And the hull, up close, showed damage, deep gouges and dents, the kind of damage that comes from a boat being rolled or pounded by heavy seas. "That boat went down hard," Lewis said quietly. "That's not normal wear and tear, that's trauma." We watched it pass, those yellow lights glowing in the empty wheelhouse frames, the damaged hull moving through the water with impossible smoothness. And as it moved past our stern, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was someone in the wheelhouse, not standing, not moving, but visible for just a moment in the dim light. A silhouette, human-shaped, gripping the wheel. Then the fog closed in and the boat was gone, and I was left wondering if I'd actually seen anything, or if my mind had created an image because it needed to believe someone was piloting that vessel. We didn't see the boat again after that. We finished our trip, came back to Dutch Harbor, and the Silver Tide went out again 2 weeks later with a different crew. They worked the same grounds, encountered fog on several nights, but never saw the boat with yellow lights. Neither did any other vessel that I talked to. It was like the Lady Beth, or whatever that boat was, had completed its circuit and moved on to different waters. But I think about it sometimes. Think about that figure in the wheelhouse, gripping the wheel of a boat that shouldn't exist. Think about the missing name on the stern, removed so thoroughly that no trace remained. Think about the pattern of sightings, always in fog, always at midnight, always following the exact same track with precision that shouldn't be possible. And I wonder if what we saw was really the Lady Beth, or if it was something else. Something that wears the shape of lost vessels, that travels through fog because it can't exist in clear conditions. that follows patterns we don't understand for reasons we can't imagine. Something that had its name taken away, or maybe gave it up, because names are for things that belong to the world of the living, and this boat doesn't belong there anymore. I've talked to other fishermen who work those waters, asked them quietly if they've seen boats without names. Most haven't, but a few have, and their descriptions match what we saw. Old vessels, dark and rust-stained, moving through fog with lights that don't belong to this era. Boats that don't respond to hails, don't show up on radar, don't have names painted where names should be. And all of them, every single one, went down decades ago. Went down in storms or accidents or circumstances that were never fully explained. Went down and were never found, leaving crews and families without closure, without graves, without any confirmation except the absence of return. Maybe that's what we're seeing in the fog. The vessels that were never properly lost because they were never properly found. Ships that can't rest because some piece of them is still out there, still fishing, still following the patterns they established in life, still moving through the water with smooth precision, even though their windows are empty and their names are gone, and nothing living should be at their wheels. I don't fish those grounds anymore. Don't want to see those yellow lights again. Don't want to encounter that boat in the fog. Let someone else witness it. Let someone else try to explain what it means when the dead don't stay sunk. I've seen enough to know that the ocean keeps what it takes, but sometimes it lets you see what it's keeping. Shows you just enough to know that beneath the surface, beneath the fog, there are vessels still moving in patterns laid down long ago by crews who never made it home. And if you're out there on a foggy night and you see dim yellow lights moving too smoothly through conditions where nothing should be moving at all, do what I should have done. Turn away. Change course. Don't try to identify it. Don't try to understand it. Just let it pass and be grateful that you're on a boat with a nay, with living crew, with a route that will take you back to harbor and home. Because some boats don't have routes anymore. They just have circuits, and they'll follow those circuits forever, moving through fog that never lifts, waters that never warm, pursuing catches they'll never bring in. Nameless vessels crewed by absence, visible only to those unfortunate enough to be in the right place at the wrong time. The Lady Beth is still out there, or something wearing her shape is, moving through the fog every September around midnight, following a track with precision that suggests intent. And if you see it, if those yellow lights appear off your bow and that dark hull emerges from the gray, don't look too closely at the wheelhouse. Don't try to see if anyone's at the wheel, because if you do look, and if you do see someone standing there, you might recognize that it's not a someone at all. Just the shadow of what used to be someone, before the ocean took them and gave back only the boat that carried them to their end. Exhaustion does strange things to your mind. I'm Eric Vance, and after 18 years on crab boats, I thought I knew every trick the Bering Sea could play on a tired body and sleep-deprived brain. I'd worked through fatigue so deep that I hallucinated voices, seen things in the corner of my vision that weren't there, experienced that weird disconnect where your body moves on autopilot while your conscious mind drifts somewhere else. But what happened in November 2015 was different. It wasn't just me, it was all of us, and it wasn't hallucination. It was something else entirely. We were on the FV Northern Light, 6 weeks into what was supposed to be an 8-week trip. The season had been brutal. Weather delays, mechanical problems, areas that should have been productive turning up empty. We were behind quota and behind schedule, which meant long shifts and short sleep. Captain Jacob Thorne was pushing us hard, not out of cruelty but out of necessity. We needed to make our numbers or the trip wouldn't cover costs. So we worked 18-hour days, grabbing sleep in 4-hour blocks, fueling ourselves with coffee and energy drinks and the knowledge that every pot we hauled got us closer to going home. By early November, we were running on fumes. I was hallucinating regularly, seeing crew members who weren't there, hearing conversations that hadn't happened. Marcus Ross, our engineer, had started talking to himself during his shifts. 2 of our deckhands, brothers named Kyle and Tyler Brennan, had gotten into 3 separate arguments over things neither of them could remember once they'd cooled down. We were all praying, our minds and bodies pushed beyond what was healthy or safe. But we had one more string of pots to haul, and then we could head in. Just one more push. November 7th started normal enough. Gray sky, moderate seas, temperature in the low 30s. We reached our string of pots around 6 o'clock a.m. and began hauling. The work was routine, mechanical. Hook the pot, bring it up, empty it, reset it, over and over. My hands moved through the motions while my mind wandered somewhere else, thinking about home, about sleep, about anything except the cold water and the metal pots and the endless cycle of work. Around 9 o'clock a.m., Jacob called me up to the wheelhouse. He wanted me to take over for a few hours while he grabbed some sleep. I'd done this dozens of times, maybe hundreds. Just maintain course, monitor the radar, keep the boat positioned properly while the deck crew worked. Simple stuff that even a brain running on fumes could handle. I took the wheel and Jacob went below, and I settled into that half-aware state that passes for consciousness when you haven't really slept in days. The last thing I clearly remember is checking the clock at 9:34 a.m. I remember looking at the radar screen, seeing our position, seeing the weather cell that was approaching from the west. I remember thinking we'd need to speed up the hauling if we wanted to finish before that weather hit. I remember Kyle's voice over the deck speaker asking about the next pot's position. I remember all of that clearly. The next thing I remember is Jacob shaking my shoulder and asking me if I was okay. I looked at him, confused, not understanding why he'd be asking that. "I'm fine," I said, "just tired." Then I looked at the clock. It was 2:47 p.m. I'd lost 5 hours. Completely gone, like they'd been cut out of the timeline. One moment it was 9:34 a.m., the next moment it was 2:47 p.m. with nothing in between. "You've been standing here not responding," Jacob said. "Marcus called up 20 minutes ago asking for course changes and you didn't answer. I came up to check and you were just standing there, staring straight ahead." He looked concerned, the kind of concern that means someone thinks you're having a medical emergency. "Are you sure you're okay? Maybe you had a seizure or something. We should get you checked out." I felt fine, tired, but fine. No headache, no confusion except for the missing time. I checked the logbook to see what had happened during those 5 hours. The last entry was mine, written at 9:37 a.m. 3 minutes after my last clear memory. The entry was in my handwriting, noting our position and the number of pots hauled. Standard stuff. But after that entry, there was nothing. 5 hours of blank pages. No course changes recorded, no pot tallies, no weather notes. Just empty white pages where entries should have been. "Did we stop hauling?" I asked Jacob. He looked at me strangely. "No, we've been working steady. Why?" I showed him the logbook, showed him the gap. He flipped through the pages like the missing entries would appear if he just looked harder. "That's not right," he said quietly. "We've hauled 42 pots since you came on watch. Someone should have been logging them." We called the crew up to the wheelhouse. All 5 of them, Marcus and the Brennan brothers, and our 2 other deckhands, Davis Kent and Michael Sorensen. Jacob asked them about the last 5 hours, asked them what they remembered. They all had the same confused look, like they were trying to recall something that should have been there but wasn't. We've been hauling pots, Marcus said slowly. I remember working. I don't know. It's fuzzy. Kyle Brennan nodded. Same. I know we've been working because I'm tired and sore, but I can't tell you what specific pots we hauled or what happened during them. It's like watching a movie, and then someone asks you about a specific scene, and you realize you weren't really paying attention. Tyler Brennan had a different concern. What's that smell? He asked. We all paused, and I realized he was right. There was a smell in the wheelhouse, faint but distinct, like ozone, the smell you get before a thunderstorm. Or maybe like something burning, but cold burning, if that makes any sense. The smell wasn't unpleasant exactly, just wrong. It didn't belong on a boat. Jacob checked all the electrical systems, thinking maybe something had overheated. Everything was normal. Battery charge good, no hot circuits, no sign of any electrical issues. But the smell persisted, that cold, burning ozone smell that none of us could identify or explain. Open the windows, Jacob said. Air this place out. We opened the wheelhouse windows and the smell faded gradually, but it took almost an hour to completely dissipate. I checked the GPS log to see our track during the missing time. The boat had maintained a perfect course, moving along our pot line with precision that would have required constant attention and course corrections. But I didn't remember making any corrections. Didn't remember doing anything except standing at the wheel. The autopilot log showed it hadn't been engaged, which meant someone had been actively steering, but I had no memory of it. Marcus went down to the engine room to check his logs. He came back up looking pale. My log has the same gap, he said. Last entry at 9:40 a.m., next entry at 2:45 p.m. 5 hours missing. He showed us the engine log, and sure enough, there was the gap. No fuel consumption notes, no temperature readings, no maintenance records. Just 5 hours of blank pages. This doesn't make sense, Jacob said. He was looking through his own notes, checking his memory against what should have happened. We've hauled 42 pots. That would take at least 4 hours, probably closer to 5 given our pace. So we've been working during that time. We've been moving and operating and apparently functioning fine. But none of us remember it, and none of us wrote anything down. Davis Kent spoke up quietly. Maybe we're all just more tired than we thought. Maybe we're working on autopilot, and our brains just aren't forming memories properly anymore. That was a reasonable explanation. Exhaustion can cause short-term memory problems, can create gaps in recall. But 5 hours? All of us experiencing the same gap at the same time? That seemed like more than simple fatigue. Jacob made the decision to pull the deck cameras. We had 3 cameras recording the deck operations for safety documentation. If we couldn't remember what had happened, maybe the cameras could show us. Marcus pulled up the footage on the wheelhouse computer and we all crowded around to watch. The footage started at 9:30 a.m., showing the deck crew working normally, hauling pots, sorting crab, resetting gear. Everything looked routine. Then at 9:37 a.m., exactly when the logbook entries stopped, something happened to the footage. It didn't cut out or go black. It just changed. The video quality shifted slightly, like we were watching through a filter. The colors looked washed out, the contrast too high, and the crew moved differently. They still worked, still hauled pots, but their movements looked off, too smooth, too coordinated, like they were dancing rather than working. "What the hell is that?" Tyler asked. We watched for another minute. The filtered footage continued, showing 5 hours of work condensed into what felt like just minutes of viewing time. We'd watch a pot come up and it would happen too fast, the crane moving at impossible speed, the crew processing the catch in seconds rather than minutes. Then the video would return to normal speed for a few moments before accelerating again. At 2:43 p.m., the footage returned to normal. The filter lifted, the colors normalized, the crew's movements became human again. We watched for a few more minutes and everything was normal. Normal speed, normal color, normal operations. Like nothing had happened. Like the previous 5 hours of weird footage had been some kind of technical glitch. The camera malfunctioned, Jacob said, but his voice had no conviction. Some kind of playback issue. Marcus shook his head. I checked the camera system this morning. Everything was working fine. And it's not just playback. Look at the timestamps. He pointed to the corner of the screen where the recording time was displayed. The timestamps matched real time. The footage showed 5 hours of work happening in 5 hours of recording time. It just looked wrong when we watched it. We sat in the wheelhouse for a long time, nobody speaking. We'd all seen the footage. We'd all experienced the missing time. We all knew that something had happened during those 5 hours, something that we couldn't remember and couldn't explain. Finally, Jacob made the call. We're done hauling. Secure the deck and let's head in. Whatever's happening out here, I don't want to be part of it anymore. Nobody argued. We secured our gear, stowed everything properly, and Jacob pointed the northern light toward Dutch Harbor. The trip back took 18 hours, and during that time we all tried to piece together what we remembered from the missing period. It was frustrating. We all had this sense that we'd been working, that we'd been conscious and active. But the actual memories were gone, replaced by this vague impression that something had happened, but we couldn't quite access what it was. Marcus had a theory. What if we did remember, but we've forgotten? Like the memories formed, but then got erased somehow. He looked at us. I keep having these flashes, images or sensations that feel like they might be from those missing hours. But every time I try to focus on them, they slip away. I knew what he meant. I was experiencing the same thing. Brief moments of recall that vanished the instant I tried to examine them. A memory of pulling a pot that felt different somehow. A memory of the sky looking strange. A memory of all of us standing on deck looking at something, though I couldn't remember what we'd been looking at. Just fragments that made no sense on their own and wouldn't connect into a coherent narrative. We got back to Dutch Harbor, and Jacob filed a report with the harbor master about the incident. He kept it vague, just noted that the crew had experienced a period of disorientation and missing time, possibly due to extreme fatigue. He didn't mention the logbook gaps, or the strange footage, or the ozone smell. He just documented that we'd experienced something unusual and had decided to end the trip early as a safety precaution. The boat went through a complete inspection. Engine, electronics, environmental systems, everything checked out fine. No carbon monoxide leaks, no electrical problems, nothing that would explain mass confusion or memory loss. The northern light was mechanically sound, which meant the problem had been with us, not the boat. We all went to the medical clinic and got checked out. Blood tests, neurological exams, the works. Everyone came back normal. No signs of poisoning, no signs of seizures or strokes, or any other medical condition that might explain what we'd experienced. The doctor's best guess was exactly what Davis had suggested. Severe exhaustion leading to a shared episode of confusional arousal. He recommended we all take several weeks off, get proper rest, and consider working shorter trips in the future. I tried to take that advice, tried to believe that it had just been tiredness, that there was a simple medical explanation, but the memories, or the fragments of memories, kept coming back. Dreams where I was on the deck pulling pots under a sky that was the wrong color. Dreams where all of us were working in perfect synchronization, like we were all connected to the same consciousness. Dreams where something vast and incomprehensible was just beyond my field of vision, present but never quite visible. Marcus started having the dreams too, So did Kyle and Tyler. We'd meet up sometimes and talk about them, comparing notes, trying to figure out if we were sharing memories or if our brains were just filling in the gaps with imagination. The dreams were similar but not identical. We'd all remember the sky being wrong, but we couldn't agree on what color it had been. We'd all remember feeling like we were being watched, but we couldn't agree on what direction the feeling came from. About 3 months after the incident, I got a call from Jacob. He asked me to come to his house, said he wanted to show me something. I drove over and found him in his garage, surrounded by printouts and notebooks. He'd become obsessed with the missing time, spending hours going through every piece of data from the boat, every log, every camera frame. "I found something," he said, and he showed me a series of photos he'd printed from the camera footage. The photos were frames from the 5-hour gap, the period where the footage looked wrong. Jacob had gone through frame by frame and found images where you could see the sky in the background. And the sky was wrong. Not wrong like storm clouds or weird weather. Wrong like it wasn't our sky at all. The color was off. This strange copper-green shade that I'd never seen in nature. And there were patterns in it. Geometric shapes that looked almost deliberate. Like the sky itself had been marked with symbols or designs. "I think something happened to us during those 5 hours," Jacob said. "I think we went somewhere else, or something else came to us. And I think our brains are protecting us by not letting us remember it clearly. Because if we did remember, if we could access those full memories, it would be more than we could handle." I looked at the photos for a long time. Part of me wanted to dismiss what Jacob was saying, wanted to believe it was just camera malfunction and exhaustion. But I'd been having those dreams. I'd been feeling those fragments of memory trying to surface. And looking at that copper-green sky with its geometric patterns, I felt something click into place. A sense of recognition that I couldn't quite put into words. "What do we do with this?" I asked. Jacob shrugged. "Nothing. What can we do? We report it, and people think we're crazy. We keep it to ourselves and we live with not knowing. Either way, we're stuck with 5 hours we can't remember and footage that shows something we don't understand." He gathered up the photos. "I just wanted you to see them. Wanted to know if you felt what I felt looking at them." I felt it, that sense of recognition, that feeling that I'd been under that copper-green sky even though I had no conscious memory of it. It was disturbing and comforting at the same time. Disturbing because it confirmed something impossible had happened. Comforting because it meant I wasn't losing my mind, that my fragmentary memories were based on something real. None of us went back to the Northern Light. Jacob sold it 6 months later, and I heard it got renamed and painted a different color. Like the new owners wanted to erase its history, start fresh with a boat that didn't carry whatever had happened during those 5 missing hours. Marcus moved to the East Coast, took a job on a lobster boat where the water was warmer and the sky was the right color. The Brennan brothers quit fishing entirely. I still work crab boats, but I've never experienced anything like the logbook gap again. I keep my logs meticulously now, noting every hour, every position, every detail, making sure there are no gaps, no missing time. And sometimes when I'm on watch in the middle of the night, I'll look up at the sky and check its color, making sure it's the normal black or gray or whatever color it should be. Making sure there are no geometric patterns forming in the clouds. Because I know now that the Bering Sea can do more than just kill you with storms or cold or accidents. It can take hours of your life and hide them where you can't reach them. It can show you things that your brain refuses to keep as memory. It can move you through time that exists but doesn't leave records. And when it does these things, all you're left with is gaps in your logbook and dreams that feel like memories of a sky that was the wrong color. And those dreams never stop. They're with me every night now. Dreams where I'm pulling pots under that copper-green sky, working in perfect synchronization with my crew, all of us moving like parts of a machine. Dreams where something massive is just beyond my vision, watching us work, interested in us for reasons I can't comprehend. Dreams that fade when I wake, but leave behind that certainty that they're not just dreams. They're echoes of those 5 missing hours, trying to surface, trying to be remembered. And maybe it's better that they stay as dreams. Maybe Jacob was right that our brains are protecting us from memories we couldn't handle. Because sometimes, late at night when I'm alone and tired and my defenses are down, I get flashes of more than just the sky. I get flashes of what was beneath that sky, what was watching us work, what had taken our time and hidden it from us. And in those flashes, I see something so vast and strange that my conscious mind rejects it immediately, refuses to process it, refuses to keep it as memory. So the logbook gap remains. 5 hours that existed but can't be recovered. 5 hours that 7 men experienced but can't remember. 5 hours that were recorded by cameras but show footage that makes no sense. And somewhere in the Bering Sea, in waters we marked with GPS coordinates, there's a place where time works differently, where the sky is the wrong color and the crew of fishing boats can work for hours without forming memories of it. And I pray I never go back to that place, never lose time again, never find myself standing at a wheel with hours missing from the clock and nothing in my mind to explain where they went. Because next time the gap might be longer. Next time, maybe we don't come back at all. Maybe we just keep working under that copper-green sky forever, pulling pots in perfect synchronization, while the real world moves on without us and our logbooks stay forever blank. The last haul of the season always feels different. There's relief mixed with exhaustion, satisfaction mixed with the knowledge that you're done. You've made it through another year on the Bering Sea without getting killed. I'm Mason Garrett, and I've been pulling crab for 21 years. 21 seasons of last hauls. 21 times I've felt that particular combination of emotions as we brought up the final pots and turned the boat toward home. But December 2019 was different. That last haul felt wrong from the start, and by the time it was over, I understood why. Some last hauls aren't endings. They're warnings. They're the ocean's way of telling you that you've seen something you shouldn't have, found something that was meant to stay hidden, and now you carry it with you forever. We were on the FV Far Horizon, working the snow crab grounds about 90 miles northwest of St. Matthew Island. It was late December, the absolute end of the season. Most boats had already headed in, gear secured, catches sold. We were one of the last boats still out, squeezing every possible day from the season because Captain Devin Merrick wanted one more good trip before winter shut everything down completely. The weather was deteriorating fast. Temperature dropping toward zero, wind building, ice forming on everything above the waterline. We had maybe 48 hours before conditions would force us off the grounds regardless of how many pots we still had in the water. "Last string," Devin announced on the morning of December 18th. "We pulled these 74 pots and we're done, home for Christmas." The crew gave a tired cheer. We'd been out for 6 weeks, pushed hard the entire time, and everyone was ready to be done. Just one more string. Just 74 more pots. Then we could secure the deck, point the boat toward Dutch Harbor, and start thinking about normal life again. The string was in deep water, about 520 feet. The pots had been soaking for 5 days, which meant they should have been heavy with crab. The first dozen came up exactly as expected. Good weight, good catch, the kind of haul that makes all the work worthwhile. We processed them quickly, working with the efficiency that comes from 6 weeks of practice, and moved on to the next markers. Pot 13 came up different. The weight was right, maybe even heavier than the previous pots. But when we swung it onto the deck and opened it, the crab inside were acting strange. They weren't trying to escape like they normally do. They were huddled together in the far corner of the pot, as far away from something as they could get, and they were dead quiet. Crab make noise when you dump them out, legs scraping against metal, shells clacking together. These were silent, moving slowly, like they were lethargic or injured. "Something's wrong with these crab," said Perry Voss, one of our deckhands. He'd been fishing for 15 years and knew crab behavior as well as anyone. "They look stressed. Look at their color." The crab were darker than normal, their shells showing a mottled pattern that Perry said indicated extreme stress. We sorted them anyway, keeping the legal males and tossing back everything else. But there was a wrongness to the whole process that made us all uneasy. The next 3 pots came up the same way. Heavy with crab, but the crab were exhibiting that same stressed behavior. Dark coloring, sluggish movement, huddled together away from something. Devin came out of the wheelhouse to look at the catch himself. "I've never seen them like this," he admitted. "It's like they're scared of something." "Predator in the area, maybe," suggested Marcus Clay, our other deckhand. "Could be a big halibut or sleeper shark working the bottom, keeping the crab stressed." That was possible. Large predators could affect crab behavior, but it didn't explain why the crab in every pot were huddling in the same corner, like they were all trying to get away from the same specific thing. Pot 18 came up heavier than it should have been. The crane strained with it, the winch groaning as it lifted the weight. We got it on deck and could see immediately that something was wrong. The pot was deformed. The metal frame bent inward on one side like something had grabbed it and squeezed. The mesh was torn in several places, not from wear, but from what looked like deliberate cuts. And inside, among the crab, was something that didn't belong. It was wrapped in the torn mesh, tangled in the webbing like it had been put there intentionally. Perry carefully pulled it free while the rest of us watched. It was metal, roughly circular, about the size of a dinner plate. The metal was dark, almost black, with a surface that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Around the edge were markings, symbols or letters in no language I recognized. The symbols were precise, machined into the metal with a sharpness that suggested they hadn't been there long. "What is that?" Marcus asked. Nobody had an answer. Devin took the object and examined it carefully. It was heavy, maybe 15 pounds, and cold in a way that went beyond the ambient temperature. Even through his work gloves, Devin could feel that unnatural cold radiating from the metal. "Some kind of equipment marker, maybe," he said. "A scientific instrument tag or military hardware. Could have gotten tangled in the pot during the set." But that didn't explain the symbols. Didn't explain why it was so cold, or why the metal looked like nothing I'd seen before. Devin took photos of it from every angle, documenting the symbols carefully. "We'll turn it over to the authorities when we get in," he said. "Probably nothing, but better to document it properly." He wrapped the object in a tarp and secured it in a storage locker, and we went back to hauling pots. The remaining pots on the string came up progressively worse. The crab were barely moving. The pots were showing more damage, and in 3 more cases we found objects similar to the first one. All roughly the same size and shape, all made of that light-absorbing black metal, all marked with symbols that made no sense. By the time we finished the string, we had 7 of these objects, and Devin's theory about scientific instruments was getting harder to believe. "These weren't randomly tangled in the pots," Perry said. He was looking at all 7 objects laid out on a tarp in the storage area. "Look at how they're positioned. Same orientation, same wrapping in the mesh, like someone placed them deliberately, like they wanted us to find them." Devin checked his GPS logs, looking at the exact positions where we'd recovered the objects. The positions formed a pattern. Not a random scatter, but a precise geometric arrangement. When you connected the positions on a map, they formed a 7-pointed star, perfectly symmetrical, covering an area about 2 miles across. "That's not natural," Devin said quietly. "That's not random distribution. Someone or something arranged these in this pattern." We were all thinking the same thing, but nobody wanted to say it. The pattern was deliberate. The objects had been placed at specific coordinates, and our pots had been set directly on top of those coordinates, like we'd been guided to find them, like we were meant to recover these objects and bring them to the surface. "Could be archaeological," Marcus suggested. "Ancient artifacts from some civilization we don't know about." Devin shook his head. "These symbols look machined. Look at the precision. This metal looks manufactured, not hand-forged. These are recent, not ancient." That night, with all our pots hauled and the boat secured for the run back to port, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about those objects, about the pattern they formed, about the crab huddling away from them like they were dangerous. Around 3:00 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went to the storage locker where Devin had secured the objects. I wanted to look at them again, wanted to see if I could make sense of the symbols in quiet when I wasn't exhausted from hauling. The storage locker was cold, colder than it should have been, even accounting for the below-freezing outside temperature. I opened the tarp where the objects were stored and immediately felt that cold intensify. It wasn't radiating from the objects, it was radiating toward them. Like they were pulling heat from the surrounding air, creating a cold sink that had nothing to do with the normal temperature distribution. I picked up one of the objects, the first one we'd found, and studied the symbols. They were precise, exact, repeated in a pattern around the circumference. As I looked at them, I started to see patterns in the patterns, like the symbols were forming words or equations in a mathematical language I didn't understand. The longer I looked, the more I became convinced that these symbols meant something specific, were communicating information in a format that human brains weren't designed to process. I felt dizzy suddenly, like the floor was tilting beneath me. I put the object back in the tarp and backed away, and the dizziness faded. Whatever those objects were, looking at them too long had an effect, a physiological effect that went beyond simple confusion or unease. "Don't touch those," I heard Devin say from behind me. I turned, and he was standing in the doorway, watching me. "I've been looking at them too," he admitted, "and I've been feeling it. The dizziness, the sense that there's information in those symbols that my brain is trying to process but can't. It's like they're designed to be incomprehensible, to create discomfort in anyone who looks at them too closely." "What do you think they are?" I asked. Devin was quiet for a moment. "I think they're a message, or a warning, something that was left down there deliberately, something that was meant to be found eventually. And I think whoever left them knew that we use crab pots, knew that we'd be dragging the bottom in this area, knew that sooner or later we'd bring these to the surface. Why would anyone do that?" Devin shrugged. "Maybe they need us to deliver these somewhere. Maybe they need surface dwellers to transport something that can't be transported any other way. Or maybe they're testing us, seeing how we react, what we do with objects we can't understand." He closed the locker. "Either way, we're turning them over to authorities in Dutch Harbor and letting them figure it out. This is beyond us." The trip back to port took 2 days. During those 2 days, several strange things happened. Our electronics started malfunctioning. The GPS would show our position jumping around by miles, then return to normal. The radar would show contacts that weren't there, then clear. The radio would pick up transmissions on frequencies that weren't supposed to exist. Voices speaking in languages that sounded almost human, but not quite. Devon documented everything, keeping careful notes in the logbook. The malfunctions were consistent with electromagnetic interference, but from what source he couldn't determine. The objects in the storage locker didn't read as magnetic on any of our instruments. They were inert, at least as far as conventional equipment could detect. But something about them was affecting our electronics, creating interference patterns that shouldn't exist. We also started having dreams. Not just me, all 6 of us aboard the Far Horizon. Dreams where we were underwater, impossibly deep, walking along the bottom in the darkness. In the dreams, we could see lights arranged in geometric patterns, structures that looked almost like buildings but weren't quite, and we could see things moving in the darkness beyond the lights, large things that didn't conform to any biology I knew. The dreams were vivid, more like memories than normal dreams, and we all woke from them with the same sense that we'd been somewhere real, not just imagined. We reached Dutch Harbor on December 20th, and Devon immediately contacted both the Coast Guard and the Marine Science Institute. Representatives from both organizations came to examine the objects within hours of our arrival. They photographed them, measured them, tested them with various instruments, and then they became very quiet and very serious. One of the scientists, a woman named Dr. Ellen Roth, took Devon aside for a private conversation. I saw them talking in low voices for nearly an hour. When Devon came back, he looked shaken. "They're not telling me everything," he said. "But what they did tell me is that these objects match others that have been found in deep water locations around the Pacific. 7 years ago, a research submarine found similar objects near the Mariana Trench. 3 years ago, a deep-sea mining operation recovered some from near Hawaii. Each find has been at progressively shallower depths, like they're migrating upward from the deep ocean." "Migrating?" I asked. "Objects don't migrate." Devon looked at me. Dr. Roth didn't say the objects were migrating. She said they were being placed at progressively shallower depths, like someone is moving them, bringing them closer to the surface in stages, and now we've found them at 520 feet. That's shallow enough that commercial fishing operations encounter them. Shallow enough that surface vessels are affected by them. "What does that mean?" Perry asked. Devon shook his head. She wouldn't say, but she emphasized that we should not discuss these finds publicly. She said there's an ongoing investigation and that our cooperation in keeping this confidential is important for national security. He paused. She also said that if we find any more of these objects in the future, we should report them immediately, but not bring them to the surface. Leave them where they are and mark the position. The authorities took all 7 objects. We were paid a recovery fee and asked to sign non-disclosure agreements. The NDAs were serious, backed by federal law, threatening significant penalties if we discuss the objects or their recovery with anyone outside authorized channels. We all signed. What else could we do? But I've thought about those objects every day since then. Thought about the pattern they formed on the ocean floor. Thought about the symbols that my brain couldn't process properly. Thought about the cold that radiated toward them rather than from them. And I've thought about Dr. Roth's words, about objects being placed at progressively shallower depths, about something migrating upward from the deep ocean. I've read about the other finds Devon mentioned. The research submarine near the Mariana Trench in 2012. The mining operation near Hawaii in 2016. And I've found references to others, older finds that aren't officially documented. Objects recovered from depths of 6,000 feet, 4,000 feet, 2,000 feet, a progression over decades, each find closer to the surface than the last. And I've done the math. If the pattern continues, if objects keep appearing at shallower depths following the same progression, Then, sometime in the next 5 to 10 years, they're going to start appearing in water shallow enough for recreational divers to encounter, and after that, shallow enough to wash up on beaches. Whatever is placing these objects, whatever is moving them steadily upward from the deep ocean, is bringing them to us, deliberately, methodically, following a timetable we don't understand for purposes we can't imagine. I'm not fishing those grounds anymore. Won't go back to the area where we found those objects. Devon sold the far horizon and retired, said he was done with crab fishing. Perry and Marcus both switched to different boats working different areas. None of us talk about what we found, not publicly, but we stay in touch, and we share information when we hear about other finds. And we hear about them more and more frequently. Objects being pulled up by longliners, by trawlers, by research vessels. Always the same description. Black metal, strange symbols, cold that radiates the wrong direction. The objects are coming up. Whatever left them down there, whatever has been placing them at progressively shallower depths for decades, is almost finished with its work. Soon they'll be shallow enough that anyone can find them. And when that happens, when there are thousands of these objects being encountered by thousands of boats and divers and beachgoers, then whatever they're designed to do will activate. And we'll learn what the symbols mean, what the pattern signifies, why they needed to be brought to the surface in stages rather than all at once. And I fear that day. Fear it more than I've feared any storm or any accident on the water. Because I've held one of those objects. I've felt the cold that moves toward it. I've looked at symbols that my brain couldn't process. And I've had dreams of walking the bottom of the ocean, seeing structures in the darkness, seeing things moving that shouldn't exist. And I know, with a certainty I can't explain, that those objects are not from us. They're not human technology or ancient artifacts. They're something else left by something else, for purposes that have nothing to do with anything we understand. The last haul of my career wasn't the end I expected. It was the beginning of understanding that the ocean holds more than fish and crab and lost boats. It holds messages. It holds markers. It holds evidence that we're not alone in these waters, that something else has been here all along, watching and waiting and slowly moving its pieces into position. And now that the pieces are almost all in place, all we can do is wait to see what they're designed to do. I still dream about those symbols. Wake up in the middle of the night with geometric patterns burned into my vision, patterns that fade before I can study them closely enough to understand. Sometimes I think my brain is trying to decipher them, working on the problem while I sleep, attempting to translate information in a format that human consciousness wasn't designed to process. And someday, maybe tomorrow, or maybe years from now, I'm going to wake up and understand what those symbols mean. And when that happens, I'm going to understand why they were placed in the pattern of a 7-pointed star, why they were left where we would find them, why they needed to come to the surface. And I pray that understanding doesn't come. Pray that my brain never cracks the code, because some information is dangerous. Some knowledge changes you in ways you can't reverse. And whatever those objects are trying to communicate, whatever they're designed to make us understand, I fear it's information that humanity isn't ready for. Information that will change everything about how we see the ocean, how we see ourselves, how we see our place in a universe that's far stranger and far more crowded than we ever imagined. So I stay away from those waters. Stay away from depths where objects might still be rising. And every time I hear about another find, another boat bringing up something they don't understand, I add it to my map. Track the progression, watch the pattern develop, and wait for the day when the objects reach the surface in numbers too great to ignore. When the pattern completes itself, and whatever they're designed to do finally activates. That day is coming. Soon. The last haul brought me warning, and I'm sharing that warning with anyone willing to listen. The ocean is not empty, the deep is not silent, and something down there has been preparing, placing pieces, moving them slowly upward over decades. And when those pieces reach critical mass, when enough of them have surfaced, then the ocean is going to tell us something, show us something, change us into something. And I fear we won't survive the knowledge. Fear that some truths are too large for human minds to hold. Fear that the last haul I ever made brought up more than crab and metal objects. It brought up the beginning of an end we don't yet understand, but will soon be unable to escape.